Europe, a powerful storm system has swept across large parts of Europe, bringing torrential rain, hurricane-force winds and widespread disruption from Spain to Germany. Named Storm Isadora by meteorologists as the violent weather left a trail of chaos, flooding streets, uprooted trees and cutting power of hundreds and thousands of homes. In France, wind exceeded 113 km/h, battered the Atlantic coast, featured trees building and forcing to temporarily close to Eiffel Tower due to safety risks. In Paris, emergency services reported over 500 calls overnight at the relentless downpour that triggered flash flooding in parts of Valencia and Barcelona. Submerged cars and flooded metro station. Emergency crew carried out multiple water rescuing in resources as rainfall reached record break levels, over 120 mm inches per hour, according to the Spanish meteorological agency.
推开你
In Germany, the state of Bavaria and North Rhine-Westphalia were hit hard. Rail service were suspended in several regions after falling trees demanded overlapped lives, with the schools money closed in precipitation. Dutch Brown warning passengers in significant delays in cancellation. Meteorologists attribute the extreme weather in deep Atlantic low-pressure system golden with the unstoppably warm continental air, and volatile mixed and intensified the storm power. Dr. Elena Richard from the European Climate Observatory stated, "We are witnessing more frequent and violent weather patterns to shift atmospheric circulated linking to climate change." The storm also caused coastal surge in Netherlands and Belgium. The authority reinforced and flood buried out along the vulnerable zone. In Amsterdam, channels overflowing, forcing evacuation in low-lying districts. Airports across Europe, including Frankfurt, Paris channels, and Madrid-Bercia, reported flight cancellation and diversions, extended thousands of traveling overnight. A powerful Atlantic storm swept across much of Europe, bringing destruction, winds, torrential rain, and widespread destruction to the light from France to Germany, Italy, and the Balkans. Meteorological Service reported wind gusts exceeded 115 km/h, calling the storm one of the most aggressive front of the season. In northern France, coastal towns were hit by strong waves crashing against sea walls, forcing authorities to carry out evacuations. Paris authority reported hundreds of fallen trees causing delays in transport lines. The risk of southern Valley says of Bavaria and North Rhine-Westphalia, where 7 months worth of rain in 24 hours. Emergency service responded to dozens of flooding incidents. The levels of several rivers, including the upper tributaries of the Danube, raised rapidly, and official warning that they could continue to rise. Italy also felt the full force of the storm. In Venice, high tides combined with the storm surge flooded the streets, forcing authorities to deploy mobile fruit barriers. Also, the said Alessandro Rossi, who lost parts of the workshop. Meteorologist Dr. Sofia Lehmann told the BBC the storm is unusual in the size of the speed. Warm sea temperatures contributed to its intensity, allowed to the rapidly intensify as it moving inland. Across the continent, more than 700,000 households were temporarily without power. Airports in Amsterdam, Munich, Geneva and Milan reported flight cancellation and significant delays. At least a dozen injured have been confirmed, although official fear in the number could rise and the situation continued to be easy. Authorities are urged residents to remain cautious as strong winds and unstable roads could pose a danger. Even after the storm moved eastward, flood warnings remain in effect in several countries. France was among the first to be stopped in Brittany when guests surprised at 116 km/h, rapid patrols and overturned vehicles. Thousands lost power, a high voltage line collapsed. I felt like a whole house was breathing, said local resident Marianne Duval. The windows were shaking so violently, I thought they would explode. In Germany, the storm defeated relentless rain. Some town in Baden-Württemberg recorded more than 120 mm in just 20 hours, triggering flash floods that overwhelmed drainage system. Firefighters rescued residents from the submerged vehicles and flooded basements. Rail service across the country were heavily impacted, with the debris blocking the roads. To the south, Italy forced the dangerous combined by the rain and intense wind. In Liguria and Tuscany, rivers burst their banks, flooded streets within minutes. Venice activated an immense flood barrier system, but parts in the historic city still soak needy water as waves pushed inland. The lagoon looked like an open sea, said both Apiro and Marco Bellini. Eastern Europe was not spared. Slovenia and Croatia reported landslides after saturated soil gave way on a steep hillsides. In parts of Balkans, power outage affected tens of thousands. According to climate analyst Dr. Helena Kraus, the storms are behavioral reflective water trends. Warmer sea surface and unstable air masses are creating storms that develop further and hit harder. Europe seeing events that used to be rare becoming more frequent. Across the continent, airports in Prague, Zurich, Frankfurt and Milan experienced major delays. Schools in several regions remain closely to safety. Insurance experts estimated early damage could exceed hundreds of millions of euros. Authorities warn strong winds and rising rivers may continue through the next 24 hours, urged people to avoid coastal area and fast-moving waterways. Europe is facing yet another night of extreme weather as a powerful storm system tears across the continent, leaving a trail of destruction from Portugal to Poland. Meteorologists describe the system as highly dynamic, following an unusual warm and frantic water-based temperature contrast over the continent. In Spain, coastal communities were battered the waves towering over 10 meters, smashing waterfront, restaurants, and flooding seaside roads. I never seen waves hit the promenade this high. The storm intensified as it pushed north. France saw widespread outage. More than 300,000 homes plunged into darkness. Emergency crews struggled into assist rural villages blocked by the fallen trees. Heavy rain triggered both low in the Pyrenees, forcing evacuation in several boroughs. Crossing into Germany, the system unleashed a combination of heavy rain and drainage gale force wind. River in Bavaria and Saxony continue to rise, threatening to overflow tonight. Rail operation canceled dozens of long-distance trails, calling the storm one of the most disruptive events in the season. We're walking around the clock to clear tracks, say rail official Eric Stein, but the debris is coming down fast that we can remove it. Central Europe experienced rapid declination. Austria and Czech Republic report roofs turned off, scalding, collapsing and traffic halted due to fallen bridges. Sirens echoing through the Vienna and emergency service responded to more than 1,200 calls within an hour. Further south, Italy is grappling with the severe flooding in Emilia-Romagna, already saturated from the previous storms. A new downpour overwhelmed riverbank. Streets turned into fast-moving streets. Residents formed human chains to pull people and stranded cars. It was like a river suddenly came alive, say witness Luca Perotti. Airports across Europe from Lisbon to Warsaw forced later delays as aircraft struggled with a shifting wind pattern. Climate experts warn storms like this are becoming more new normal, shaping the rising temperatures and increasingly unstoppable jet streams. Authority urged the public to stay indoors, avoid coastal area, and prepare for the determination of the storm continued its eastward march. A powerful storm that swept across Europe caused severe flooding, widespread power outages and transportation fears, with the emergency service struggling to cope with one of the most destructive weather events of the year in the region. The system caused by warm Atlantic air causing the coast continental front initially hit Portugal and Spain, dumping nearly the month's worth of rain in 24 hours. The streets of Valencia and Porto turned into rivers, with the cars adrift in turbulent waters. It looked like a whole city was drowning, said resident Marta Silva. Moving north, the storm intensified over the France, while gusts of up 114 km/h uprooted trees and tore on roads. The level of the Loire and Garonne rivers rose dangerously, forcing the evacuation of residents from low-lying village. More than 400,000 households were left without electricity. We haven't seen such a rapid rise in the river levels in more than 10 years, said hydrologist Pierre Lemar. In Germany, the region most affected torrential rain overwhelmed drainage system from Bavaria to North Rhine-Pfalz, rapid flash flooding, inundated basements, underground parking lots, and railway tunnels. In a rising now is its higher level of the system, forcing compilation and shattering. It was terrible, say many shop owners island. When immersed, the water rushed under the doors as a dam had burst. Central Europe faced equally several conditions. Austria and Czech Republic and Slovakia reported landslides after the rain-saturated slopes gave way. Train service across the region were suspended due to debris falling in tracks. Emergency service described the workload and almost non-stop. Meanwhile, southern region of Italy and Slovenia experienced flash flood caused by the sudden downpour. Sirens sounded throughout the Venice and high tides combined with the storm surge flooded historic squares. Experts warned that this situation is becoming increasingly common. Storm systems in Europe are intensifying, say climatologist Dr. Yelena Karas. Warning ocean and unstable air currents are exacerbating extreme precipitation and winds. Authorities are urging residents to avoid rivers, stay indoors, and prepare to more severe weather and storm continue to move eastward. Storm rainfall overnight came from Portugal and Spain, with the tiny waves and rainfall several months late in years. In coastal Galicia, when the gust exceeded 115 km an hour, rapid apart, marine dogs and flooding entire waterfront districts. The sea looked like it was a balloon, said fisherman Luis Andrade. As the system moved east, France witnessed catastrophic impact. Rivers surged beyond their banks, damaged roads, and cut dozens of communities. In Normandy, firefighters carried stranded residents from second floor window, and flood waters reached waist-deep levels within minutes. This was not rain, this was a wall of water, said local residents more or less vivid. Germany, however, was among the best storm epicenter, a region already saturated by the recent unstable weather, were hit by another barrage and intense downpour. Streets in Calgary and Düsseldorf turned into swelling torrents. Airports were delayed to cancel it as winds battered a runway.
Да, закручивается, да.
It's the most extreme rainfall ever recorded in early winter, noted meteorologist Dr. Janice Miller. For the East Australia, Hungary and the Czech Republic activated national emergency protocols after sudden cold bursts overwhelmed drainage networks. Railway operations reported widespread cancellation with the passengers stranded in station overnight. In the south, Italy, Slovenia and Croatia faced violent thunderstorms had rising levels. Venice activated an immersed flood barriers, but even with the definite rising parts of the city experienced aqua alta flooding. Climatologist was the storm using straight in the tide and high energy jet streams. Warning seas in the eastern Atlantic are injecting more moisture into these systems, explained climate analyst Dr. Sofia Rigi. When they collide with the cold continental air, the results are explosive. European authorities are urging residents to stay indoors, avoid flooded areas, and expect further disruption as the storm continues in slow destructive march across the continent. A powerful storm tore through the Berlin, Germany capital, bringing gale force winds, intense rainfall, and widespread disruption as the emergency service battled dangerous conditions across the city. The storm arrived swiftly, with the dark sky and sudden squalls catching communities off guard during the late afternoon. When the guests are branches from the trees into the debris stretched onto roads, rail lines and pocket vehicles. Fire crews responded to hundreds of emergency calls as roofs were damaged and construction barriers collapsed in several districts. In central Berlin, major parks were closed after alleged river protest, while police assailed the streets near Alexandropolis, tended fallen debris. Public transport was severely affected, with the delays, cancellation, and embarked on the regional rail service after tracks were obstructed fallen trees. In southern Lucky, fire terrain passed through the streets, set weather of residents in a near-cold district.
Nein, lass es. Ja, ich lasse es.
The wind was so strong it was hard to stand. Heavy rain overwhelmed the drainage system, flooding underpasses in low-lying roads, drivers were urged abandon, vehicles and water level are rapidly in some areas. Power outages were reported in parts of the city, leaving thousands temporarily without electricity. Meteorologists said the storm formed at a powerful Atlantic weather system called it the weather unstable air from the Central Europe, a pattern becoming increasingly common. Experts warn that the city is battling with a dense infrastructure as against drainage networks face growing risk from extreme weather. Authorities urged residents to remain indoors, avoid wooded areas and rescue loose objects to the storm remain possible. As cleanup efforts continue to storm, was one again highlighting Europe's vulnerability to rapidly intensify weather events.
Questa è via Sant'Alessio.
Guarda che roba questo!
Guardate questo signore.
嗰啲廁所水飛出嚟啊！你睇，哇，太好！
Rapaziada, tornado! É tornado, louco! Minha Nossa Senhora, tá voando tudo as teias!
Heavy flooding has struck the historic town of Samars in the southern France after the River overflowed banks following days of intense rainfall across the Grange department. The river, known locally for its sudden and violent flood, even often reappeared to as weather ladies rose rapidly overnight, sending muddy water rushing through the street squares and the ground floor homes. Several bridges were particularly submerged, while cars were swept from parking area that stood against the birds. Emergency service moved swiftly to evacuate residents from the most vulnerable areas, using boats to reach those trapped by the rising water. The water came incredibly fast. One local shop owner said, "When less than an hour, the streets turned into river." Authorities reported that the rainfall total is surrounding Cavendish foothills exceeded seasonal averages in short period, overwhelming drainage system and forcing the well beyond the capacity. Schools were closed as a precaution, and several roads linking Samars to nearby town were cut off. power outage affected parts of the town, while emergency shelters were opened to accommodate displaced families. Firefighters and civil protection teams working through the night and secure buildings to assist residents urged people to stay indoors and avoid flooded areas. Local officials warning that although water level had begun to stabilize, the situation remained fragile. Even a small increase in rainfall upstream could trigger another surge, a regional emergency coordinator said. Meteorologists noted that extreme rainfall events in southern France are becoming more frequent, raising concerns about the vulnerability of historic river towns like Sommeraise. As cleanup efforts begin, authorities are assisting domestic businesses and infrastructure while residents face the long process for recovering from the yet another powerful reminder of nature's force. Several flooding has calculated part of Europe. After days of relentless rain overwhelming rivers, the drainage system and all of the saturated ground. From historic times of rural villages, routes was transformed into fast-moving waterway, forcing thousands of flee their homes. Witnesses described a terrified scenes as flowing rivers burst their banks, uprooted roads that were carried through the neighborhoods like matchsticks. In several cities, selection of asphalt cracked under the pressure of rising water, exposing broken pipes and a collapsed roadbeds. Cars were swept away while emergency crews attempted to reach a trapped resident. It sounded like a thunder-breathed defeat, said the one resident described the moment that the road outside the cone split open, that the water came rushing in. Older buildings proved especially vulnerable. In low-lying area, floodwaters poured into ground floor, destroyed homes, shops, and family belongings within minutes. Power cuts and described mobile networks left many isolated by nightfall. Across the region, schools were closed and transport links suspended. Rescue teams used boats and helicopters to evacuate families from rooftops and upper floor. In town squares and church, people gathered to pray for survivors and for news missing loved ones.
Sabes, teilatuak ziaku jauziko, ez? Oskerrak ez dutela ipinit ondoa. Hau da, benetan, impresionantea. Hau da...
Europe, a powerful storm system has swept across large parts of Europe, bringing torrential rain, hurricane-force winds and widespread disruption from Spain to Germany. Named Storm Isadora by meteorologists, the violent weather left a trail of chaos, flooding streets, uprooted trees and cutting power of hundreds of thousands of homes. In France, wind exceeded 113 km/h, battering the Atlantic coast, total trees were rebuilding and forcing to temporarily close to Eiffel Tower due to safety risks. In Paris, emergency services reported over 500 calls overnight at relentless downpour that triggered flash flooding in parts of Valencia and Barcelona. Submerged cars and flooded metro station. Emergency crew carried out multiple water rescuing resources as rainfall reached record-break levels, over 120 mm inches per hour, according to the Spanish Meteorological Agency.
推近
In Germany, the state of Bavaria and North Rhine-Westphalia were hit hard. Rest service were suspended in several regions after falling trees dominated overhead flights, with the schools money closed in precipitation. Dutch Brown warning passengers in significant delays in cancellation. Meteorologists attribute the extreme weather in deep Atlantic low-pressure system golden with the unstoppably warm continental air and volatile mixed and intensified the storm power. Dr. Elena Richel from the European Climate Observatory stated, "We are witnessing more frequent and violent weather patterns to shift atmospheric circulated linking to climate change." The storm also caused coastal surge in Netherlands and Belgium. The authority reinforcing flood buried out along the vulnerable zone. In Amsterdam, channels overflowing, forcing evacuation in low-lying districts. Airports across Europe, including Frankfurt, Paris channels and Madrid, Belgium, reported flight cancellation and diversions, extended thousands of traveling overnight. A powerful Atlantic storm swept across much of Europe, bringing destructive winds, torrential rain, and widespread destruction to northern light from France to Germany, Italy, and the Balkans. Meteorological Service reported wind gusts exceeded 115 km/h, calling the storm one of the most aggressive front of the season. In northern France, coastal towns were hit by storm waves crashing against sea walls, forcing authorities to carry out evacuations. Paris authority reported hundreds of fallen trees, causing delays in transport lines. The risk of southern valley said of Bavaria and North Rhine-Westphalia, where 7 months worth of rain in 24 hours. Emergency service responded to dozens of flooding incidents. The levels of several rivers, including the upper tributaries of the Danube, rose rapidly, and official warning today could continue to rise. Italy also felt the full force of the storm. In Venice, high tides combined with the storm surge flooded the streets, forcing authorities to deploy mobile fruit barriers. Said Alessandro Rossi, who lost part of the workshop. Meteorologist Dr. Sofia Lehmann told the BBC the storm is unusual in the size of the speed. Warm sea temperatures contributed to its intensity, allowed to the rapidly intensify as the moving inland. Across the continent, more than 700,000 households were temporarily without power. Airports in Amsterdam, Munich, Geneva and Milan reported by cancellation and significant delays. At least a dozen injured have been confirmed, although official fear in the number could rise and the situation continued to be easy. Authorities are urged residents to remain cautious as strong winds and unstable trees could pose a danger. Even after the storm moved eastward, flood warnings remain in effect in several countries. France was among the first to be stopped in Brittany when guests surprised 116 km/h, rapid patrols and overturned vehicles. Thousands lost power, a high voltage line collapsed. I felt like a whole house was breathing, said local residents Marianne Duval. The windows were shaking so violently, I thought they would explode. In Germany, the storm defeated relentless rain. Some town in Baden-Württemberg recorded more than 120 mm in just 20 hours, triggering flash floods that overwhelmed drainage system. Firefighters rescued residents from the submerged vehicles and flooded basements. Rail service across the country were heavily impacted, with the debris blocking to the roofs. For the south, Italy forced the dangerous combined by the rain and intense wind. In Liguria and Tuscany, rivers burst their banks, flooded streets within minutes. Venice activated an immense flood barrier system, but parts in the historic city still soak needy water as waves pushed inland. The lagoon looked like an open sea, said board Apiro Marco-Bellini. Eastern Europe was not spared. Slovenia and Croatia reported landslides after saturated soil gave way on a steep hillsides. In parts of Balkans, power outage affected tens of thousands. According to climate analyst Dr. Helena Kraus, the storms are behavior reflective water trends. Warmer sea surface and unstable air masses are creating storms that develop further and hit harder. Europe's seeing events that used to be rare becoming more frequent. Across the continent, airports in Prague, Zurich, Frankfurt and Milan experienced major delays. Schools in several regions remain closely to safety. Insurance experts estimated early damage could exceed hundreds of millions of euros. Authorities warn strong winds and rising rivers may continue through the next 24 hours, urged people to avoid coastal area and fast-moving waterways. is facing yet another night of extreme weather as a powerful storm system tears across the continent, leaving a trail of destruction from Portugal to Poland. Meteorologists describe the system as highly dynamic, following an unusual warm Atlantic water-based temperature contrast over the continent. In Spain, coastal communities were battered the waves towering over 10 meters, smashing waterfront, restaurants, and flooding seaside roads. I never seen waves hit the promenade at this high. The storm intensified as it pushed north. France saw widespread outage. More than 300,000 homes plunged into darkness. Emergency crews struggled to assist